The Facebook query component in Matillion ETL uses the Facebook API to extract data and stage that data in a staging area. This staged data is then loaded into permanent tables and can be used for further enrichment and management of the data. The Facebook query component interacts with Graph and Marketing Facebook APIs to expose endpoints as data sources, which can then be selected in the component's properties. Before you begin, you'll require a Facebook developer login with access to creating web apps. Matillion ETL requires a Facebook app to give access to the APIs required for data extraction. A Facebook app will provide you with an app ID and app secret, which is needed to populate the client ID and client secret when setting up authentication through an OAuth in Matillion ETL. A step-by-step guide to Facebook third-party OAuth setup can be found on the Matillion documentation site. Once you have the client ID and secret, Facebook OAuth can be set up in Matillion ETL by using the Manage OAuth option from the project menu. Before beginning, you will require a Facebook web app that redirects your Matillion ETL instance and has access to Facebook login and marketing APIs. Your Facebook app will have an app ID and app secret that can be entered as the client ID and client secret, respectively, in Matillion ETL's OAuth configuration menu. This will grant your Matillion ETL instance with access to your Facebook data. When configured, Matillion ETL will store the OAuth under the name you gave earlier, which can then be selected from the Facebook query component. This way, you can potentially set up OAuths for multiple Facebook accounts and switch between them inside the component. For this example, we'll query the endpoint Simple Insight, which provides insights for a specific page or post. We'll use this to find page impressions for a specific page per day. Begin by selecting the Facebook query component from the Components panel and dragging it onto the canvas of an orchestration job. On the Properties tab of the component, under Authentication, we will select the Facebook OAuth we set up before, allowing the connection to Facebook APIs. A validated OAuth allows us to begin querying Facebook data. To assist building your query, you have the choice of Basic and Advanced mode in the component properties. Basic reveals data source, data selection, and data source filter properties. These are used to select Facebook endpoints to query, column selection, and options for filtering the data. However, if you're more comfortable with SQL, Advanced mode gives you the flexibility to write your query this way. Note that the data sources available are determined by the Facebook API driver and may not be directly equivalent to the endpoints found in the Facebook API. The available fields and their descriptions are documented in the data model. The data source property reveals the endpoints from the Graph and Marketing APIs, in which the available options are exposed as tables. For our example, we'll select the Simple Insights endpoint to query page impressions. Data selection is where you select the fields from the endpoint to become columns in the table. For this example, we'll use all the columns. Then, you can use the data source filter to filter the data to your requirements. Here, we'll filter to see impressions for a specific page by day. Be aware, when using Facebook Query, the data will often need to be filtered to return any results. For this example, using Simple Insights, a target must be specified. In addition, insight name and period should always be specified. So, in the data source filter, we'll enter a valid page ID for the target, the insight name, page impressions, and a period of day. This selection can be written in SQL using Advanced mode if preferred, where you can use the SQL query property to enter your query. Use the Staging Area property to select where you want to stage the data. You can choose a specific location for this depending on your cloud storage option. Also, we'll need to select a name for our staging table. We'll call this FB Staging Page Impressions for this example. Then, when the properties have been completed and the component has validated successfully, we can use the Sample tab to preview the data before running the job. Here we can see the Simple Insights data filtered on page ID and page impressions per day. Now we're happy the query is doing what we want, we can run the job to load the queried data to our target staging table. Right-click on the canvas and click Run Job. And when successful, the data will have been pulled from Facebook into our staging table, the number of loaded rows appearing here. We can then view this data within Matillion ETL by dragging a table input component onto the canvas of a transformation job and selecting our staging table. If you wish to amend the query, for example, only capture data for a specific date range, head back to the Properties tab of the Facebook query component and change the Data Source Filter or SQL option to reflect the changes. Be aware, if the target table undergoes a change in structure, it will be recreated. Otherwise, the target table is truncated. Setting the property load option to recreate target table to off will prevent both recreation and truncation. For troubleshooting issues with this component, please visit the Matillion documentation site, which has fixes for common errors. Also, on the Matillion documentation site, you'll find full information on the Facebook query component, including data model and available tables and views.